The following program does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Reality Radio 101, its advertisers and sponsors, or its listening audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowski, where mind, mood, and what matters to you are discussed. We're broadcasting live from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, on Reality Radio 101. Our email address is instudio101@gmail.com. And now, your host of the Bear Psychology Radio Show, Dr. Anna Baranowski.
Hi, everyone. I am so glad to be here with you again today. As you know, as usual, we are talking about bearing witness to evolving mind, mood, and health. And we have a very important topic today, which is based on a book by our author guest today, Nanci Smith, who is a lawyer, and she focuses specifically on collaborative divorce. She's actually a collaborative divorce expert, and her book is called Untangling Your Marriage, A Guide to Collaborative Divorce. And I was reading through it the other day and was really impressed by the use of a team to help you with divorce. I mean, we all know that separation, divorce, marital failure, I mean, these things are not very uncommon. The numbers of people who get divorced are the numbers are actually quite large. So we know that, and we all know somebody who's gone through a divorce. And for some people, you know, it's not just a life-altering event, it's a trauma. And it can have devastating, life-altering impact, not just on the two people getting a divorce, but the kids and the extended family and friends. I mean, this can be a devastation where, you know, instead of, you know, bringing together, you know, a good kind of life going forward after divorce for the family, for friendship groups, for family groups, things can fall apart. You can lose relationships. You can lose your financial security. There's so many ways in which this can devastate. But of course, the big one is emotions. Emotions are high, and we are left with feelings of emotional devastation that can really undermine our feelings of connection and security going forward in our life. For some people, after a divorce, they never want to get into another relationship again. And, you know, we know that actually people who have relationships, whether intimate or not, doesn't matter, tend to do better in life. And if what a divorce does to you is it leaves you feeling that you don't trust anybody and you'll never trust anybody again, life is going to look pretty lonely. And we don't want that for you. So, on a very uplifting and positive note, Nanci Smith brings forward this incredible book to help people maybe not make it easy, but make it more manageable and maybe make it an opportunity for you to evolve and grow into the person that you want to be after divorce. So on that note, I want to thank you so much, Nanci, for joining us today and, sharing this really important information and writing your book. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
I know that you are a lawyer, and somewhere along the line, you moved into family law, and then I think later on into collaborative divorce. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your motivations of going into family law, and then what led you to collaborative divorce. And I will also say that we have some really, really remarkably insightful and amazing listeners who I hope will join us by sending in their comments, their experiences, their thoughts, their questions to you and I at instudio101@gmail.com. So back to you. What brought you to law and what brought you to collaborative divorce?
Thank you so much. So obviously, I didn't set out in my youth to become a divorce lawyer, right? That was not actually my goal. I was young and I was called into the profession. I had a very strong social justice spirit when I was younger. So I came into the law intentionally and wanting to do justice. And then I moved to Vermont, and it's a small state. And at the time I met my former spouse, and we decided to live in Vermont and make Vermont our life instead of that time in our life that we look back on so fondly and think wasn't that great. So in a small state, I worked in a general practice firm, and I was exposed to family law in that practice. And even as a student, my last year in law school, I worked in a clinic, a domestic violence clinic. And I just found that this was a really important space that I could be helpful. I could support people through a major life transition. I could see, just as a human being, that when people came into the office with divorce on their mind, they were not at their best. And they were experiencing such a intense emotional reaction that that I was just sort of left to deal with through an adversarial process. And over time, by 2005, I realized that I didn't like this. I didn't think that the adversarial process was well suited to the deep emotionality that was going on and that the clients were experiencing, and that there must be a better way. And then as things happen, I learned about collaborative divorce. It had been around for about 30 years, and it was just a secret for divorce lawyers. I think it's one of the best kept secrets. And I decided, a couple of years ago to write the book because I really want your listeners to understand that there are options in different ways of getting divorced, just like you suggested in the opening. It doesn't have to be a devastating, emotionally devastating, impact where you're never going to want to trust yourself or anyone else ever again. It is an opportunity for personal growth and empowerment. And if you can shift your mindset toward that sort of narrative, I think you'll end up a lot happier in the end of the day. So that's kind of where it started and where we're at.
Wow. So I just want to go over a couple of things that you just said. One of them being that you were at a domestic violence clinic. So really, in essence, you were doing trauma law because, that's really a very significant kind of clinic to work in. And we would know that trauma would be very high in that kind of environment. How did you deal with that?
Well, back in the day at the clinic, I was representing victims of domestic violence in family court. And so when I was young and a lawyer, I liked being in court. I liked the adrenaline. I liked being, able to help people find their voice when they couldn't find it themselves and they needed support through the adversarial process. Collaborative divorce, of course, is sort of the antithesis of dealing with that level of trauma, except to your point that it is a loss. Divorce, I look at now through the lens of grief. And if you look at it from that point of view, there are so many losses associated with a divorce. You lose your best friend, you lose your lover, you're going to lose your status as a spouse in society. You're going to lose, probably if you have children, half the time with your children or some portion of time with your children. You're going to lose half of your family wealth, whatever you've accumulated. Somebody's going to have to lose their housing. you're potentially going to be losing relationships with in-laws and significant friends and family and community that you've developed over the course of the marriage. And I think the thing that really hurts people the most is the loss of the dream of what you thought you were creating. And that's the one that hits the hardest, because now things are not at all going to be the way you thought they were going to be and the way you were planning. And you're going to have a massive adjustment. And so to that effect, when you lose all those things, I can see it as, and I can appreciate the feeling that this is like, the rug is being pulled out from under you. This feels devastating. You didn't ask for it, perhaps. And even the person who recognizes the need for the divorce, they're also going through a grieving process. So it's easy to think that, only the recipient who's hearing about it is the one who's going to have these intense reactions. I don't think that's true. And in my experience, even the person who finally recognizes and says it's time for a divorce, they're also going to be suffering in their own way. They may have worked through it. They may be psychologically more ready to get divorced because they've had time to think about it. But it's still a loss, and it can still represent a trauma. And so the question is, how are you going to reintegrate yourself? And are you going to get the right support?
Wow. That's a lot. I mean, your whole idea of the assumptive loss is like we assume a lot of things in our lives in terms of our couplehood, let's say. And, one of the things we generally don't assume is that we're going to end up in this state of separateness. And it just creates a pivot that leaves us out of sorts with what we had expected. And, expectations, we can become very rigidly connected with our expectations. Very hard to make that pivot because we become so connected with it. And it's very hard to let go and move on. And yet, unless we do let go and move on and leave space for the new, we tend to be in this very rigid place where we can't move forward and we can't start to integrate new parts of our lives. It can be a very lonely time. So I like that you really recognize all these losses, because I think that there is something very real about that. I wonder what you can tell us about the current statistics in terms of marriage and divorce, because I think it's helpful for our listeners to have a current idea of that.
Sure. The statistics tend to hover around, 48 to 50% of first marriages end in divorce, which, when you think about it, you would hope that as a society and a culture that we would become it would be more normalized, and there wouldn't be so much shame attached to it in the sense of failure when you recognize that, almost half of the marriages that start are going to end in divorce. And reframing it from a failure to just a recognition that perhaps what you wanted when you were in your 20s is not the same as what you want in your 40s or 50s or whatever. And without all the shame attached to it, as if it's a failure, as opposed to just an opportunity to recognize that maybe that relationship has run its course and you can still look back on it fondly. And if you have children, recognize your connection, but also recognize that it might just be time to move on. And then second marriages, of course, I don't know if anybody knows this, but there's a higher rate. It's closer to 75% of second marriages end in divorce. And my theory about that, which is not backed by science, is that if you have not done the work on your first divorce, and by work, I mean, take the time to psychologically understand what your role was in that marriage, in that relationship, and how you might want to do it differently. Take the time to have some insight into your contribution to why that relationship didn't turn out the way you thought it was. If you don't do the work, then you're likely to repeat the pattern, and then you're going to end up with the same result, which is a divorce in your second marriage.
I love that. From a psychological perspective, in most cases, the things that cause us trouble right now, it's like the past is pouring into the present, and it undermines our ability to see what is happening right in front of our eyes and understand that maybe what's really bothering us is an injury from when we were 7, or, something that happened and we witnessed in our family of origin, or, being bullied as a child on the school ground. These things can come from just about anywhere. But you're right, unless we really do that deep dive and say, what am I bringing into this interaction? Like every once in a while, I have an interaction with my husband and I will realize I'm offside. I did not handle that well. I I reacted quickly, or I was, not really listening carefully, or I jumped to a conclusion, or sometimes he does it too, where, he'll say something too quickly, and you start to realize like these old reactions, they come from a kind of very visceral place. And the interaction, the way it can get heated so quickly, usually doesn't have anything to do with this moment, because often we argue about very benign things, or when you look at them in retrospect, you realize, well, I don't know what I got so upset about. I guess that was pretty silly. I could even feel a little embarrassed, about getting so fueled up because, my husband put the coffee cup into the sink instead of the dishwasher. And it's like, I mean, that's not divorce material, but honestly, it really is divorce material. People get divorced over this stuff, right? It's like,
Right.
you didn't hear me, you don't listen to me, whatever it is, whatever gets ignited. So I really value what you're saying, Nanci, and the compassionate approach that you take to divorce. The other thing that you said that really resonates with me is this whole thing around shame. And how, when you're in your 20s and you're getting married, it's like, who are you at 20 something, right? It's like, who are you at that age? And then you kind of look at yourself today and recognize, just from a developmental perspective, you may have really moved to a very new place. And, maybe you could work on the fundamental issues with your spouse, but really maybe not. Maybe that has run its course. And, just like if you were dating somebody from, 17 to 21, you wouldn't be expected necessarily to marry that person. And it wouldn't be a personal failure if that relationship ended and you moved on when you went to college or university to another relationship. And yet marriage ending, total shame, right? Yeah. So I guess you've seen a lot of that piece around stigma and shame. So how do you help your clients work through that so that they can have this kind of healthier approach to divorce?
Right. So I really appreciate sort of that last summary also about just the impact. Like, you don't want to underestimate the impact of rejection on the human spirit at the time of the divorce. And you also want to recognize that the divorce, like you said, when you don't even know why you're reacting in a way that you're reacting and you're losing your mind over the dish in the sink, it's never about the dish in the sink, right? It's always about something else. And we may not even know the history of our family trauma, the ancestral trauma, like all of it gets triggered, right? And so your abandonment issues, your attachment issues, the impact of rejection is all real, and it's happening, and you feel it and it hurts, and there's no doubt about it. So what I try to counsel clients and what we do in the collaborative model is recognize that. First of all, we just acknowledge it, which I think gives people a lot of sense of like, okay, this is normal. Like, what I'm feeling is normal. No one's judging me for it. It's a very non-judgmental process. And we allow the couple enough space to recognize, like, okay, we're going to get divorced. However, we're going to do it in a way that is going to allow both people to become psychologically ready to make the major decisions that affect their future financial security and their relationships with their children and other important family members. So that may mean that if my client comes to me and says, I'd like to be divorced yesterday, I'm ready for this, I'm really ready, we've been separated for a while. And I would say, well, I appreciate that. But if you just told your spouse like last week that you want to get divorced and you finally had the courage to use your words and say it, they're not ready. They're going to think it's coming from left field. They are going to be blindsided. They're going to have a big reaction. And we don't want to be trying to negotiate or, shove a settlement down somebody's throat when they're having this emotional reaction. Like, the courteous thing, the compassionate thing is to allow them enough space and time to get support, get their own therapist, perhaps come into a collaborative model where no one's going to rush you into making decisions, where we acknowledge the deep emotionality of what's going on. And we just recognize that even just being patient, even a couple months, if somebody has the right support, they're going to change. They're going to evolve. They're eventually going to work through their grief and get to a place of acceptance that this is actually a good thing. This is actually in my interest to actually end this relationship. If I'm with somebody who's telling me they don't want to be with me, like, at what point, why do I want to keep clinging on to that? Like, at some point, I want to relax my grip on that and recognize my own value and take take control over what I have control over. Like, what do I say? What comes out of my mouth, what goes into my mouth, my thoughts and my feet, where I go. Like that's about the extent of your control. And if you can kind of recognize that and approach your divorce process from the mindset of, I'm not going to be ashamed that my relationship is ending. I appreciate the fact that my spouse named it, even if I wasn't expecting it. And how can I use this as an opportunity for my personal growth so I can become the best person that I am and that I always envisioned myself to be. But now when I think about it, I really haven't been that person in this relationship. Maybe I've been a little stifled. Maybe I haven't explored my own talents and haven't really appreciated what I bring to the table. So it's an opportunity.
Okay. I want to go back to something you just said that I think is really interesting and important. I've seen it quite a bit in my practice as well, that a partner will say the relationship is over and the other person is blindsided by it. They just didn't see it coming. Now, I will just say for our great listeners out there, if there's some comment you want to make, some experience you want to share, a question you have, instudio101@gmail.com, please email us and we'd love to take your questions. So this is a question from me, Nanci. How do you make sense of that one person is blindsided by this declaration? I want a divorce. How does that happen?
Well, from my point of view as the divorce lawyer, I just basically think it's denial. I think it just takes time to get out of denial and realize that, yes, you may feel blindsided, but when you actually start to unpack it, there were signs, there were things that were happening. When you really think about it, are you really satisfied? Are you feeling satisfied in the marriage? And when people start to think about it and they have some time and they get over the initial shock and that embarrassment, I think that's what it is. It's like this embarrassment, the shame, the stigma are the first things that come up, and that rejection and that feeling in the pit of your stomach that you are being rejected wholly. And this whole idea of like the relationship is over, that's a myth. Just FYI, it's a myth. If you have children together, your relationship is never really truly over. It's going to evolve, and you have some control and a choice about how you are going to be in relation with the other parent of your children. And you want to set a good example. So like there's an opportunity to set an example for your children about how to handle adversity and conflict with dignity and mutual respect. And so I try to tell people that right off the bat, even if they're really in deep pain and it really does hurt. And I acknowledge that. And I appreciate that that's where it is, but it's not going to stay there. It's going to evolve. And I think I'm an advocate for people to take responsibility for themselves on some level. And you could act like a victim, but like, who wants to do that? I think if you have a choice, you're going to want to be a survivor. You're going to want to take responsibility, change the things you can, which also includes the way you respond to your spouse.
For sure. So that brings me to the next issue, which is you helping us as best as you can to explain what is this thing you're calling collaborative divorce, and really what does it include? I'm just going to say from your book, it states collaborative divorce lawyers will be very upfront about their approach to divorce. They will proudly display their affinity for the collaborative divorce model. They will most often carry the insignia of the International Academy of Collaborative Professionals somewhere on their site. They will also promote their skills as mediators or peacemakers. They frequently spend quite a bit of time explaining the collaborative divorce model and why they like to use it. There's quite a bit of information online. You can just type in collaborative divorce, and actually there are practitioners in Canada as well as the US. So it is being kind of taken on board quite well in North America, but I agree, most people don't use it yet. It's not the primary approach. Some collaborative lawyers, this is still from your book, will only practice collaborative divorce and mediation. Others may still offer an adversarial in-court model for clients they think need that type of support. So Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what this approach means and what's the difference between adversarial and collaborative.
Sure. So collaborative divorce is a specific model. When you see it like capital C, capital D, collaborative divorce or collaborative law, it's a specific mindset and it's a model. It's a divorce process. It's out of court. It's non-adversarial, which means you're not going to become the adversary of your spouse. It is interdisciplinary in nature, which means that there are two lawyers representing each client so that you know you will get the legal information that you need and nobody's going to get screwed over. You can just relax. The lawyer is not out to get you. They're there to provide, guardrails and also to provide legal advice as the process goes forward and to help draft documents and agreements that are going to be legally binding. So the lawyer's job is not to make things worse, but to provide their experience and expertise. There's also a neutral mental health coach, and that person is there not to provide diagnoses and to do therapy, couples counseling. They're there to normalize all of the intense emotions that we've already been talking about today. The anger, the betrayal, the rage, the sadness, the disappointment, the grief, all of that, to help move the process forward, to facilitate communication, to build in accountability and trust, which are usually the two things that are most missing when people decide to get divorced. There's poor communication, there's no accountability, and nobody trusts anybody. So that's normal. We expect that. The mental health coach helps with that. And in some places, there is a two-coach model, and some places that means that each person gets their own mental health coach, and sometimes it's just a one-coach model. And then you also have a financial neutral, one person whose job it is to collect and analyze all of the financial data. So it's one person handling that, not two lawyers and their paralegals and the rest of the folks at the firm. And one person collects and analyzes the financial data. And that can happen at the same time that you're working through all the intense emotions. So the one person who really wants the divorce to be moving forward at some kind of reasonable pace can be rest assured that you are. At the same time you're dealing with the emotional stuff and the parenting plans and narratives and things like that, you can also be having the financial neutral collecting and analyzing and organizing and presenting the financial picture. Because it's also very true that in a marriage, there's a division of labor, and somebody's very facile and very comfortable with all the financial data in a marriage, and the other parent or the party is not. And so we want to make sure that you're on equal footing and that you both understand the financial reality before anybody's going to ask you to make decisions about what settlement might look like, right? So there's a process of gathering, collecting, educating each other. And that's what the financial neutral does. So as an interdisciplinary team, we basically cover all the elements that most people need when they get divorced. They need a lawyer. They need a financial person to help them understand their finances and the cash flow and what are the implications of a property settlement and maybe alimony, which is spousal support. And they also, and they could use the benefit of somebody who's skilled in family systems, who understands the dynamic of divorce, who understands trauma, loss, and also who's got some child development experience and can help a parenting plan and have a conversation about that. And also the loss of identity. We didn't even talk about that. That's like also a huge loss, because if you get divorced and you've got a role in the marriage and you like it, you are now being asked to change because you cannot most times maintain exactly kind of the way things were when now you're going to be in two homes and there's going to be different expectations. So that's a lot to deal with as well. And that goes both ways, of course. If you've been the primary caregiver and you've been home, you may be asked to think about how are you going to be financially self-sufficient into the future. And if you've been the primary wage earner, you may say, you know what, I've been working for all these years and I don't want to lose the rest of, my children's minority. If I've got 5 years left, I want to be able to, coach sports and show up and do whatever, to have more of an impact on my children's life. And maybe I don't want to work as much. So those are deep conversations, tied to identity that we talk about in a collaborative model. So that's how we do it. And we work through it. And by the time everyone's ready, psychologically ready and financially understands what's going on, then that's when we start talking about options, and we generate options that are going to be good for both sides of the couple as well as the family. And we don't throw out lowball offers that we know are going to insult the other side, which is kind of common in an adversarial practice where we're just trying to, get the biggest piece of the pie. And we might start low and we do a traditional negotiation dance. We don't do that in a collaborative model. In a collaborative model, we're all, rolling up our sleeves at the same time. We have the same information and we're trying to generate ideas that are going to work for everybody. And that's the primary difference from an adversarial process, where each party has their own lawyer and the lawyers negotiate back and forth. And if they can't agree, they throw up their hands and they say, oh, well, we can't work it out. Let's just go to court. And then we let a judge decide.
Wow. Well, I mean, when I hear all that, it sounds like a pretty wise way to go and a very well-resourced way to go. But for some people, it might sound like a really expensive way to go, Nanci. So, why would somebody choose collaborative divorce? Is it actually more expensive, or are there reasons that, would make it make more sense?
Sure. So there's always a cost associated with a divorce. There's an emotional cost and there's a financial cost. And in a traditional model, if you are not encouraged for the 6 months to a year while you're waiting for your final hearing, if you're not encouraged to work together and you end up in front of a judge, that is going to be the most expensive process. So the higher the conflict, the higher the cost in the long run. And also recognize, and your client, your listeners should probably know this, 98% of cases settle. So most cases settle. So the question you have to ask yourself is, how do I want my case to settle? Do I want it to settle in a way where we're supported, where we're educated, where we're making joint decisions, when we have a team to support us making good decisions for ourselves, and where we have a chance of emerging wholehearted and healthy as opposed to bitter and resentful? Or do we want to settle our case on the courthouse steps or at a full day mediation 2 weeks before we're scheduled to go to court for a full day or 2 or a week? So depending on people's resources, depending on their level of conflict, depending on if they feel like they're on equal footing to bargain with each other, the power dynamic is an important element to assess realistically when you're thinking about what process you want to choose, right? So you could, if you both feel like you're on equal footing and there's not a lot to fight about, and maybe the kids are already out of the house or you don't have children, and it's a short marriage, you could do it yourself. It's a do-it-yourself option. We call it the kitchen table option. Get the forms online, fill out the paperwork, file an uncontested divorce. That's one way. Even if you have things that you've talked about, and maybe you've got a counselor and you've been working on couples counseling, but you realize you're going to get divorced, but there's not that much to fight about. There's a low level of conflict, and you're both on equal footing, you could just do your own divorce. Have a lawyer look it over and then file it. That's the cheapest, that's the most control. Then you move up to mediation, which is two people who have equal bargaining power in the relationship and equal access to the data, the financial data. And you go to one person who's a neutral who can help you facilitate that difficult conversation. You just want somebody neutral to facilitate the conversation. That's what a mediator does. The mediators don't offer legal advice. They're not allowed to. One lawyer is not allowed to represent two people in a divorce, even when you basically agree with each other. So a mediator is going to help you reach an agreement, help you maybe put the paperwork together, and then encourage you to each have independent counsel, review it, sign off on it, or give you at least their blessing, and then you can file that. So that's a mediated agreement. That's also very economical, and it's great for people who have equal access to the data and are on equal playing field and feel competent to negotiate on their own behalf. Not everybody has that level of resource where they either feel like they're on equal bargaining footing with their partner or equal access to the data or understanding it. And so in those cases, the next level up would be collaborative divorce, which I like to describe sometimes as like mediation on steroids. It's a confidential process. It's designed to get both your needs met. It's designed to get to an agreement. And it's designed to also take into consideration all those emotional things that we talked about that are present in every divorce. And then if you can't do either of those things, then you move on to litigation. And of course, the one thing about collaborative divorce that everybody should be aware of, and the reason why a lot of lawyers don't like it, is that if the collaborative model fails to result in an agreement and one of you doesn't like it and they don't want to do it anymore, you can withdraw from the process, but the lawyers will not carry on. They're not going to continue to represent you in court. So that means that you're going to have to go get litigation counsel and basically start all over again. So we want to be careful at the beginning of the process to make sure that you're good candidates for the process, that you have the capacity to show up and be honest and do what you say you're going to do, and that there's no latent or obvious personality disorder that would make it almost impossible for us to get to the end of it. So that's the one caveat. And we also don't deal with active domestic violence. There are reasons if a victim feels safe enough, and maybe the history is in the past, and they don't want to have a public forum, they prefer to keep it private and discreet, that even in cases where there has been domestic violence, if there's been work on it and the victim feels safe enough, and the lawyers and the mental health coach all believe that we can do it in a safe way, then we could still do a collaborative divorce. But it's going to cost money either way.
Right. You mention in your book, you say, I tell clients that divorce is 80% emotional, 10% legal, and 10% financial. With all those strong emotions pouring into this, it seems like it's a pretty tall order to get to all the basic details of walking through the legal and the financial. If 80% is emotional, that would suggest to me that sometimes you would have situations where one person, is just so angry or hurt or upset that they are not prepared to do a collaborative divorce, even if it is actually the better route, and overall it is going to leave everybody's assets intact. I know people who have spent literally, I'm not kidding about this, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars on a divorce. I don't think that would have happened in a collaborative divorce.
Exactly. It would never have happened in a collaborative divorce. So it's true. There are people who want to fight for a variety of reasons. And if your spouse is one of those and is unwilling to accept any, like, has an inability to have any insight, like zero, and or is just out to fight, to hurt you in some way and use the system as a weapon, then, that's not a collaborative case. However, I think if most people, given their choice and given a little bit of space to think about it, could see how this might be advantageous for both of you. And even if you're super, super angry, like we deal with people who have intense emotions, like, somebody just had an affair and they just heard about it 2 weeks ago. Like, what is your choice? To call the lawyer and file for divorce, or maybe call a collaborative lawyer and say, look, I am hurt. I am pissed off. I don't trust. My world has been rocked. What do I do? And it's like, well, if this is the end of the marriage for you, because not every affair means that everybody's going to get divorced. Like if you read Esther Perel, the whole, everyone has choices nowadays about how you're going to manage yourself. And whether you stay in a relationship or you don't, if there's been an affair, that's a choice. But if you're going to get divorced, then the question is always, how do you want to do it? And what's the more hopeful outcome for you? Even if you're really, really upset and justifiably so, there's still that little part of you that says, I could either go to court and make it worse, or I could show up, or I could show up for a process and hope that the team can contain, it can handle my intense emotions and allow me the dignity of processing my emotions as part of this divorce experience. Because what I would say, Anna, is the irony is that the 10% legal, 10% financial, 2 lawyers could get a couple divorced in about 4 hours if they are psychologically ready to be divorced. And so it's not a big deal. Like, it's a natural progression. Once you've worked through the intense emotional stuff and you have the opportunity to get off your chest what has always been on your mind, like at this point, there's no reason to hold back. And I feel like a lot of times people are not taught to be really authentic and honest in their communication with their spouse because they're afraid of getting divorced. So the irony, of course, is, well, now divorce is on the table, so there's nothing to lose. Like, you might as well find your courage, find your voice, say what needs to be said. And then most people feel better after that. And then they start to become more ready to deal with the reality of the minutia of the logistics and, the financial settlement. And it happens very quickly once both people are ready to be divorced.
I've actually had clients who were able to have a much more meaningful relationship after an affair once they started talking about divorce, cleared the air, and started to actually have a real heart-to-heart relationship with, everything that goes along with it. And, they actually, in the end, did not get a divorce. I'm going to start reading through some of our listeners' comments. Hello, Dr. Baranowski. This is probably the most important topic that you have had on your radio show. I've been listening to you for a few years, and I think we can say divorce affects the majority of population rather than a lot of the trauma that you normally talk about. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I actually really agree, Eric. This is hugely traumatic, very, very tough stuff. Thank you for your comment. Here's another one. I think we've covered this. This is from James, who just says, what exactly is collaborative law? And you did such a good take on that. Really, what is collaborative divorce? So I really think we've got that covered. This is from Kelly. Hello, ladies. Great show. I used to be all for the institution of marriage, but not anymore. I was married for 10 years and I thought we had a very good marriage, but obviously not. You talk about communication and I tried. But what good is it if you talk, listen, and reason with a spouse, but they continue with the same behavior? It gets very frustrating, hurtful, and depressing. So we divorced. No more. Meet, greet, have fun, and live your own life. You do not need a spouse and all the legal stuff that goes with it in a divorce. Any comments, Nanci?
Oh my goodness. Well, no, other than yes, I agree. The institution of marriage is a very interesting and fascinating construct. And I encourage anybody to do some research on it, to read some Esther Perel, her books, Mating in Captivity or A State of Affairs. She does a great job chronicling the history of the institution, and it doesn't work for everyone. And I think it's okay. It can be a beautiful thing. There's just so much expectation, like you said at the beginning, and so many expectations when you start out, and those vows that you make are so intense, and they may just not be realistic, in today's society when we live as long as we do, and we have as much, especially women have more access to independence financially, and we don't need the institution to support us financially. So that has been a big shift over time. So I think it's really, we're in a time of life where an evolution as a species where we have a lot of choices, and rather than judging each other and the choices that we make, just, give things tries. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't work for you, that's okay too. And there's no sense of, judging or putting people down for the choices that they make.
Beautifully said. Yeah, I know that we do have to live in our own unique ways and form our lives in a way that actually makes sense for us. This one is from Anne, and she says, hello, folks. You stated that your guest has a book out. Where can I get it? So, Nanci, do you want to take that?
Of course. It's on Amazon. It's just called Untangling Your Marriage, A Guide to Collaborative Divorce. And my name is spelled Nanci with an I, Nanci. Smith. And yeah, I appreciate that. And you could also go to my website if you wanted to. It's there as well. NanciSmithLaw.com.
Yeah. And I think you have some interesting interviews and blogs on your website as well. And I think that's worth looking at. In addition, here's one that's very interesting. I'd love to get your comment on this one, Nanci. This one is from William, who says, hey, here's one for you. Marriage should be illegal in all countries. Oh, please go at that one, Nanci.
I had heard once that in some cultures, every 5 years or so, they have like a recommitment ceremony of some sort, like just check in with each other and make sure, whether it needs to be illegal or not. Like to my earlier point, I think there's some sense of, I don't know, the institution creates a sense of security. Is it real? Is it not? Is it an illusion? It really is going to depend on the individual and how whole you are when you enter into the marriage, and how much space you are giving each other to be your own individual people, or whether you're going to kind of fall into that old idea of becoming one, and then like, which one? Who are you becoming? Are you going to be able to maintain your separate autonomy? So I don't know whether it needs to be illegal, but I think it just should be a choice. And then maybe, keep assessing and being honest whether it's really working for you every few years. It's probably not a bad idea. So
if divorce were illegal, maybe marriage should be illegal too. Just to simplify things, you don't have to either get married nor get divorced, and then, you take care of all that stuff. Here is another one. Collaborative divorce, question mark? Right. I tried that. I just wanted to be fair with my ex. She wouldn't go for anything fair. She wanted out and she wanted everything. I went bankrupt with my legal fees and the judge gave her just about everything. I was devastated. The system sucks. So I want to say something. So this is from Jake, and thank you for the comment, Jake, but I do want to say something about this because I do think sometimes the system is not fair and does not work well. And Nanci really captured it in her explanation of the adversarial approach that is embedded in the mechanism of divorce. And really that comes from the criminal justice system. Divorce should never have actually taken a criminal adversarial approach in a court. You know, it always should have been two human beings who came together, loving each other, wanting the best for each other, and then developmentally coming to a place where it was no longer feasible. How do you, like you say in your book, untangle your marriage then in a way that could be meaningful for two people? Now, if you have a person, like you said before, Nanci, who is simply not up for it, then I think that you really, really need to be careful about knowing what your own rights are. That means, you know, really educating yourself on what the rights are within your province or state or county, and understand, you know, there are certain written rules and regulations, laws and expectations. You know, what are your rights? You need to know what those are, and you need to select your lawyer carefully. You need to select somebody who can actually work on your behalf. Now, I've seen this happen far too many times where somebody basically says, oh, you know, I feel so guilty, or, you know, I want to show what a good person I am, so I'm going to just give them everything. And then, you know, you end up being in a very devastated financial position. And again, you know, that comes from an emotional perspective. You're giving everything, not because it's the right thing. You're giving everything because of something emotional that you're carrying, that you're living with, that you're burdened by. So I don't know how this happened to you, Jake. I'm really sorry to hear it. I have heard this happen to many people. But, you know, I think that there are some pieces of this that would need to be peeled back. And I would really encourage you to do that, so you're not carrying the burden of this forever as well. You know, especially if it's keeping you isolated and alone and not trusting other people. Nanci, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you. And I agree. I'm sorry that happened. And we hear about that a lot. The system is designed to be adversarial. I would just make a slight modification that I think the family court system came out of the civil court system, not necessarily the criminal justice system. There's maybe a bit of a combination. I mean, it's still adversarial. You still have rights. You have a right to due process, which is similar in a criminal case, and you have fundamental constitutional rights, like the right to relate to your children free from unwarranted governmental interference, at least in the United States. But the system itself came out of the civil system, which is adversarial, two lawyers designed to bring out the truth in front of a jury or a judge. And there are rules of procedure, there's rules of evidence. And it's not necessarily designed to allow, and it sort of creates a winner-loser dynamic. That's the nature of the adversarial system. So if you put yourself, you know, in life, you get out of life what you put into it. So if you go into an adversarial system, you are likely to come out adversaries, right? I mean, that's just kind of logic. And if you come into a divorce process with a collaborative mindset where you don't want to be adversaries at the end of the day, maybe you can't see how you're going to get there, and that's okay. You don't have to see the process. That's what the professionals are for. We've seen it before. We've done thousands of these. This is your first time. We recognize that. But if you at least can have the concept that you don't want to make your own life miserable, you don't really want to make your spouse's life miserable, because that makes for very difficult co-parenting if that's part of your life, and you don't want to be ruined or bankrupted financially, then you could get some information about the collaborative model. Google collaborative divorce lawyers near me. They practice in every state. And like you said, in Canada, they're all across the country in Canada. There are great collaborative professionals up there in Canada. And, you know, understand your options. And then you can make a wise decision, even if you're hurt. And that's okay. You can be hurt and still make a wise decision for your future.
Yeah, it sounds like in so many cases, emotions override our best instincts for survival in a way, because people can fight for, like a beanbag chair that, they bought 20 years ago, and it becomes the focus of a battle. And it's just taking thousands of dollars of time to talk about a beanbag chair. And, you're not really recognizing that what's really happening is something very emotional that is kind of stealing from your tomorrow. And, I really mean that about stealing from your tomorrow, because you're going to still have to kind of go through life and live your life and, understand what this battle is really about, because you don't want it to undermine your resources for the future. You went through a divorce yourself, Nanci. I think in the book you reference a kind of feeling sorry for your divorcing clients and then facing this yourself. And I wonder how you navigated that, and whether your collaborative approach occurred before or after your own divorce.
Right. So in my circumstance, and I read about that in the book, so I was I had been doing collaborative divorce for about 5 years, and I had never thought of getting divorced. Like I was in it for good. I thought my spouse and I were like, whatever, going to manage it and not be the 50% that ended up divorced. But then when the time came when that really was my reality, I had to accept reality. And I think I was a little ashamed about it. I would couch it in terms of like it being ironic, like, oh, the divorce lawyer getting divorced. I thought it was kind of ironic. But at the end of the day, my spouse and I couldn't do a collaborative process. And that might have been me wanting to rush through it and put the pain behind me a little bit. I could say that is probably accurate now looking back. But some people are just not suited at the moment to do the collaborative process, and that's okay too. But we were able to work it out, the details without going to court. It was not a public display of all of our stuff. And I think that's another consideration for people, is like, how public do you want this all to be? Some people think that going to the court is going to somehow absolve them of their own contribution, that somehow the judge is going to see it exactly the way they see it, that then they're going to be vindicated. That rarely happens. The judge is going to do what they think is the right thing to do, given the facts and the hard line, whatever are the facts, just the facts, ma'am. It's not going to be about the emotion. They're not social service agencies. They're not going to be concerned about your future, relationship that much. They're not going to spend a lot of time. They're not going to be very nuanced. They're going to just give you a decision to get you divorced and divide your property and come up with a schedule for how you are going to relate to your children if you cannot figure out how to do that yourself. So that's not a great option for most people. Sometimes it happens, but like I said, only about 2% of those super hard cases end up in court in front of a fully contested, hearing over multiple days with the judge deciding everything. Those are not the norm. And so I think you just have to figure out who you are, and if you and your spouse can agree on a process that's going to work for you.
Yeah, I want to say that one of the interesting things in the book are your appendices, where you provide collaborative divorce participation agreement, and, a discussion of fees and experts, how the process works, your rights and obligations, how to withdraw from the CD approach if it doesn't work. Just incredibly worth looking at if you find yourself in a position where you're heading down this road. You might want to just pick up the book, even just to look at that piece of it, so you understand that there's another way forward, with a team, with resources, but that there's another way forward that may be really beneficial to you, even if you buy the book and if you've already had the conversation with your soon-to-be ex-spouse and you leave it on your coffee table or something like that, or the kitchen table, so that they can look with the bookmark to the Appendix B Collaborative Divorce Participation Agreement. And then there's a section, why have a mental health coach? And then Appendix D, which is how it works for the client, the collaborative approach. It's a very rich book, and it has resources that I think if anybody is moving in this direction, it is a very kind of beneficial approach to consider. Certainly, if you're going to find yourself in a situation where you're going down this road, look at all your options and try to figure out what might work for you. Nanci, are there things that you would like to share that I have not asked you in our last few minutes today?
Well, thanks, Anna. I think you did a great summary, and I really appreciate the time here. I just would encourage anyone who's just thinking about divorce or who hasn't quite pulled the trigger yet to talk to a collaborative divorce attorney in your area, just so that you understand what your options are. And that's why I wrote the book. It's not full of jargon. It's not for professionals. It's for everyday people who are contemplating divorce. And then interviewing, there's some chapters in there about how to interview a lawyer, like how to be your lawyer's best friend, sort of, how to be the client that, your lawyer loves picking up the phone for. Because there are times when you're in an adversary relationship with your own lawyer, and that stinks. Like, that's a bad feeling when you're paying and somebody, you just can tell that the relationship isn't really working. They're not hearing you. So how to interview your lawyer, what kind of questions, if the collaborative model is something that aligns with your values of decency, mutual respect, transparency, integrity, then interview your lawyer to make sure that they understand what this concept is. And if the first one you go to says, "What are you talking about? I've never heard of it," just move on. Like, you could listen and thank them, but then find somebody who actually does align with your core values, even when you're feeling like your amygdala may have been hijacked, right? Like, you feel like you're in fight, flight, or freeze, like paralysis. And that's your early evolutionary, response to threat. And it does feel like a threat. And there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear about the future, but you do not want to live your life, I think, based on fear, and fear of the unknown. Like, get your information, get it from reliable sources, and make educated decisions, even when you're feeling hurt.
Can you talk a little bit about, before we finish, the kinds of questions you might ask a lawyer? That would be helpful. That would be a helpful starting point.
Sure. I think you definitely always want to know, what are their hourly rates? What's their philosophy? Do they practice collaborative divorce? Do they think that you would be a good candidate for it? Like, after you've explained a little bit about your family dynamic, you can ask them honestly, do you think this is a good process for me? Or would you recommend that I do mediation? Or do you think I could do it myself? Or do you think this is like a litigation case? And your lawyer, your collaborative divorce lawyer, is going to tell it to you straight, because they don't want to start a case if they think that it's really going to be adversarial and somebody's going to really not be willing to play by the rules. You want to know, roughly how much this is going to cost. It really does depend on the level of conflict and your readiness. So the thing about the collaborative model is, because the lawyers are the most expensive usually on the team, we try to put you with the right professional at the right time. So if you don't need the lawyers at a meeting, we don't go to the meeting. Like, you can talk to the financial neutral to talk about the money issues. You can talk to the coach about parenting and communication issues. You don't need the lawyers there for those kind of calls. And we step in when you need us. So you want to check out your lawyer and just feel like either you're peas in a pod or you need your alter ego. Like, if you need your lawyer to advocate for you, you need to ask them, are you prepared to do that for me? Like, I don't really feel like I've got that voice yet. Or if you feel like your lawyer and you get along well, then that's nice. Then it's going to be a supportive relationship where you're getting your needs met and you're getting through this process in a way that's not going to cost you a fortune and isn't going to cost you your soul and your dignity.
And you said one more thing, which is sometimes you can be a good client. Can you help people be that client? Can you give us a little bit of guidance around that? Some people are able.
Yes. So I think, from my personal point of view, a good client is one who comes to me before they make the decision. So I'm not fixing a mistake that already was made because it was rash, and sort of, you come to me because you want my advice on something and we talk it through. You don't try to micromanage what I'm doing. Don't offer to help me to write letters or, do my job. Stay in your own lane. You're the client. I'm the lawyer. Let me do my job. Pay your bill when you're supposed to. And just show up authentically. Just be authentic, be honest. You got to be honest with your lawyers. And that's why you have a confidential relationship. So even though the process has a lot of transparency in it, you have an independent, confidential relationship with your attorney, and you should use it. And the reason why it's it's a sanctified relationship of confidentiality and privilege. And that's because we want you to be honest. And that allows the lawyer to help you serve you best by being honest.
So this has been a great interview, very, very rich, a lot of information, very helpful for our listeners. It's a very important topic and people struggle with this. So if you find yourself in a position where your relationship is not going in the right direction, you may want to look into collaborative divorce as an option, or maybe pick up Untangling Your Marriage, a guide to collaborative divorce by Nanci Smith. And can you tell us where you're located now, just in case people are in your area and needing help?
Sure. I'm happy to do consultations, and you can reach me at nanci@nancismithlaw.com. That's my email address. You're welcome to send an email or go to the website. There's a lot of information on the website, which is just Nanci, Nanci, Smithlaw.com.
It's been a pleasure to speak with you, Nanci. Thank you so very much. And for everybody out there, have a gentle day, take care of yourself, and be well. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowski, right here on Reality Radio 101.